Ash? Right, I'm not going to do the video like we have done. Welcome, everybody. We're starting 5 minutes late. Sorry about that. So this is the March 2023 meeting. Can you believe it? Getting on. What's that? Time is, the clock is ticking. All right, so tonight, a bit of news and information about the Space Association to share with you. Got an Australian Space News segment, which is quite a lot going on, and I've had to chop down and edit down a fair bit of it, but a lot going on. Then we've got a bit of discussion about the association itself and what we might or might not do in the future. And then Angelo Di Grazia will bring us his international space news. So those people who are not familiar with what we do, we run obviously the meetings that we've got on tonight. We also have a weekly radio show. Speaking of which, where's Andrew tonight? Not coming? Okay. And that's available on podcast. Michael Abdullah does a great job of editing the radio show and turning it into something listenable. I didn't say that, Andrew. All right, here we go. This is a test for you. Today, I spoke to an astronaut. This year is the 50th anniversary of the Skylab mission. We're producing a 2-part in-depth astronaut interview. That'll be screened at May and June meetings this year. In fact, the interview was longer than I thought, so it might go over 3 meetings. I'm not sure, don't know. Here's a clue for you. I haven't told you who it might be, but here's a good opportunity to guess. There was a relationship with this astronaut with the Apollo 13 as well as the Skylab 2 mission, not the Skylab 1 as the patch indicates, but there's a story behind that as well. Anyone care to guess who that might be? He's obviously still alive, so that might narrow down the numbers. Anyone else? We've had a guess of Joe Kerwin in the room. You get the chocolates and the champagne, Angelo. Joe Kerwin, who's 91, just turned 91, and a lovely guy. He doesn't look. Hey, he's been in space. It kills off all those radiation things that make you age. No, this was in his heyday, just before he flew. So that's really exciting. Joe was a fantastic guy, a lovely person. He actually joined in when we did our online meeting last year on Apollo 13, the year before, was it? My goodness me. I didn't know he was joining, and we had an online meeting back when we were everything by Zoom back then, about the Apollo 13 mission. And he's a friend of some of the guys up in Honeysuckle Creek. And Mike Dinn, who was a former deputy director of Honeysuckle Creek, mentioned it to Joe. And next thing you know, he pops up in our Zoom meeting, and trying to calculate the time, I think our Zoom meeting started at about 8 p.m. That would have been about 2 a.m. I think there for Joe. He's in Central Time in the USA, but he jumped on board and was a ball, and was flirting with one of the members, as people might recall. Remember Tina? Yeah, no, that was great. All right, so not everyone's here that I thought would be here for this discussion, but we probably have to start moving on with it. This is a bit of a discussion that we've been having amongst the committee about what might be happening, what we might do, how we might proceed with the Space Association itself. I just want to highlight to people, members and people that just come along to the meetings, the amount of work and things that get done for every meeting, and also for the radio show and other things. So meeting every month, there's arranging, coordinating speakers, presenting the content, research and presentation of that content, audio visual setup, which is primarily Ashley, monitoring and tear down of that remote experience. So Ashley gets here a couple of hours before everything starts, and is usually the last person to walk out the door at night. And invaluable what Ashley does. Various members or the committee do the editing of the resultant YouTube recording and then upload that to our YouTube channel. Andrew Rennie does the weekly radio show. He's been doing it for 180 years, I believe. Is that right? No, it's like 31, I think. Continues. I don't think he's missed a night other than when he was away in America to watch a space shuttle launch or something. So 32 years. There we go. So we thank Andrew for that. The weekly podcast, once the radio show gets broadcast and at the same time recorded, Michael Dill jumps in and edits that, does some creative editing as well as far as some of the musical content and the ums and ahs and various breaks in the flow of the show itself, and just tightens it up. It's really good. We also do special events, as people are probably familiar. We did an Apollo 11 50th and an Apollo 13 50th, and we've done various other things. In fact, we did an Apollo 11 45th before that, and a few other things like that as well. We went to the last air show here that was here in Melbourne, not the one just past, the one back pre-COVID. Remember COVID? And a lot of other things as well. We've also partnered with the Engineers Australia and RMIT to do various things like, what was the author? Jim Hansen and the Apollo in the Neil Armstrong biography did. Yeah. So yeah, a lot of work goes on there to set all that up and run it. So our members are getting older. Not just the committee, but everyone, basically. I suppose that's a natural thing, but the average age in the membership of the group is getting higher. And I mean, I guess the spin-off of COVID is that people realise that the online convenience and experience means that, you know, that don't necessarily need to jump in their car and come into the city on a wet, cool, windy night. They can sit at home and have their cup of cocoa in their dressing gown and watch it online, which sounds pretty good tonight, actually, but, you know, I'm here. Mind you, you don't get a beer and a Palmer, so you're missing out on a rich experience. So obviously the committee is also getting older, as anyone that's looking at the camera can probably see. We're also, to be honest, getting burned out a little bit, some of us. I mean, there's a lot of work. We've done it for many years. The committee's been stable for quite some period of time, and the various roles have been done. We will enjoy it, but it's a big commitment every year, every week, I should say, or every month. So, you know, that's a consideration. So I guess the question has come up, you know, what if some of us, one of us, all of us, either A, don't want to do it anymore, or B, don't feel like doing it anymore, or C, can't do it anymore? What will happen to all those activities that the association does? So that got to a point where we maybe think about some kind of succession plan, where maybe there might be some people that are interested or have kind of enjoyed the meetings, but haven't really felt that they want to or needed to step up to be part of it. It is a bit of work, but that doesn't mean anyone that there's no job here that no one else can do, and perhaps even do better. So, you know, it's an open group. So we invite anyone who's got an interest to make contact with us. So what we're doing, we're going to planning to have a members only Zoom meeting at some point in the future, basically in the lead up to the annual general meeting, which has now been set for May the 22nd of this year. So we've got to have the AGM by the end of May each year. So we need to, if something's going to happen, we need to, or some change is going to happen, we need to plan it. We need to have people thinking about whether they want to be involved in a higher level than they currently are, and how that might work. Every year the AGM is held, and every year it's open to any member, paid up member, to nominate for the committee or any roles within the committee. And so that is always the case. So there's never None of these positions are permanent. We're not locked in with a $6 million contract, much as I would like to have been. I haven't seen that in my pay packet yet. So no, there's all these roles are voluntary, and no one's got a guarantee of anything. It's purely A, whether they want to do it, and B, whether they get a vote for or against as part of that AGM. So have a think about that. May the 22nd is the AGM, and more details will come around to every member in the lead up to that about the agenda for the meeting, what the process is, how you may nominate for things or put in proposals or move a motion for some change to happen. So very open to any of that input. Right, so that's enough of the news around the Space Association. We look forward to talking with you more about it. So just as a reminder, this Space Association is an all voluntary operation, and you can join up or renew your membership or rejoin at space.asn.au, and we'd love to have you come along or be along. So we do have members interstate, and potentially we could have members overseas, but I don't think we've got any currently. The meetings, the formula for those meetings are the fourth Monday of each month. So obviously tonight is the fourth month of Monday, March, and the next one will be the 24th of April, and the month after that will be that AGM that I mentioned before. So that'll be a combined AGM meeting. We'll try to keep the AGM nice and tight and a short part of the overall meeting. So the next meeting is Monday, April 24. And there's a reason I had the picture of the Starliner here, but as our international correspondent, Angelo, will let you know, it's been delayed. Wah, wah, wah. You okay? Turn the volume up. No, I can talk loud or whatever. All right, so just a bit of Australian space news. If you're old enough to know who this bloke is, you're officially old. Yeah. Eric Pierce, those eyebrows. That's it. That's it. All right. So a bit of stuff going on in Australia. Quasar satellite technology can secure $6 million. Sorry, Tim? Oh, maybe I know. $6 million of funding. Avcom Space and Defence and Quasar Satellite Technology announced they have partnered to accelerate a Quasar ground station offerings. The first site will break ground in regional Victoria in late 2023 and expanding across the country in coming years. So that's nice and local. Two Australian businesses will continue to strengthen the Australian sovereign industrial capabilities. All Australian ground segment solution that will support multiple missions, including downlink of customer telemetry and offering space domain awareness services. So Avcom, they're a Sydney-based company that they build. Basically, they build ground stations, receiving stations, RF equipment, and for civil defence and space astronomy. They've got a 41-year history of manufacturing and maintaining satellite ground stations. So this is just a sample of some of their pictures of their facilities that I grabbed off their website. But obviously, this new Quasar thing has a different profile, a different technology. So you can see there's some a PAF, I can't remember what they call PAF, satellite receiver. So it's essentially an array of multiple array of receivers which can collect data from satellites. World-class multi-beam digital phased array, which brings new and unique capabilities for both SATCOMs and SDA. I should have checked out what SDA meant, shouldn't I? Anyway, I'm sure you can look it up. So dual use technology, advanced patented IP, it's basically an independent spin-off of technology out of the CSIRO's radio astronomy division, and has 10 years of research and development behind it. So sounds great. So this is kind of the problem or the solution that they've come up with. The present-day ground stations support one satellite at a time and mechanically track the satellite, whereas their Quasar stations will be able to support many satellites simultaneously and electronically track each satellite. So the thing's not tilting across from horizon to horizon. It's using these multiple sensors to perform that function. So I'm not a physicist. I don't pretend to understand it, but this is kind of the mud map of how the workflow goes. So you've got your satellites in Earth orbit, etc., sending down and being received by the antenna system, real-time processing, data processing, presentation, and going up to the cloud. So satellite users can tap into this technology along with many other users and be able to track and use the downlinks through that system. So it sounds really good. Oh, sorry, that's done. Okay. Australia's to acquire soft kill tech to disable satellites. So the head of the Space Command, the Australian Defence Force Command, is looking to acquire soft kill technology to disable enemy satellites. Soft kill, basically it means that they're not going to blow the thing up and send millions of pieces of debris. It basically destroys its functionality. It comes after the Australian government in October committed to an agreement to not test physical missiles against satellites in space, which is a good thing not to do. So they join many other countries in making that commitment. So some of the examples of soft kill: high power microwaves, chemical sprayers, that's an interesting one, kinetic kill vehicles, radio frequency jammers, lasers, and robotic mechanisms. So watch this space. Sounds like a computer game I was last night. Yes, yeah. Okay. I'll just relay that to the stream. Right, so jamming could be a temporary soft kill, whereas a kinetic kill will actually kill it, as opposed to disabling it for a shortened period of time or a defined period of time. Thanks for that, Len. So they haven't really said much about what it is, but obviously the concern about space junk is very real, and the concern has increased a number of anti-satellite missile tests carried out by the Russian Federation in recent years. Igor, you might want to speak to that. I know nothing. So Russia's carried out 7 anti-satellite missile tests since 2015. The latest the test destroyed the Cosmos 1408 satellite, causing debris cloud that required the ISS to maneuver to avoid that debris cloud. So not a good situation. So the head of the Space Force, Air Vice Marshal Catherine Roberts, was appointed to be its head. And among the responsibilities of the Space Command will be supporting space domain awareness, sovereign control, satellite communications, and space-based Earth observation and navigation. All right, so another spaceport announced. Space Centre Australia, not Australian Space Centre, as opposed to the People's Fund of Judea, as opposed to the Judean People's Fund. Space Centre Australia prepares to be the nation's first large-scale multi-use spaceport, and its CEO said that it could open doors for business and communities in far north Queensland. So they've got a bit of a timeline of what they think they will do or when they'd like to do it. James Palmer is the co-founder and CEO. So this is due to be fully functional by 2028, according to them, and generate direct employment for communities in far north Queensland. Won't read all that. So estimating more than 300 full-time roles could be generated to support the spaceport in far north Queensland. So we've got a number of spaceports coming up. We've got the Equatorial Space up in Darwin, or in Darwin, not Darwin, North Territory. We've got Southern Launch in South Australia. The Bowen one, that Gilmore Space. One in Esperance. Who's running that? But don't forget, we've got the Moody Space Centre one in, what is it, on the Gold Coast? Serpent. So this is where it's located. It is far north Queensland, up at the tippy tip up there. Weeper.
This is the place where
That's right. 1986, they were proposing one up there. Bjelke Petersen was in power and he was all for it, wasn't he? But I think he got killed off by environmental concerns, among other things. Aboriginal community complained. Right. Oh, well, hopefully they've knocked that issue out of the way. So they're saying that the Asia Pacific Space Launch, which was a joint venture between Space Centre Australia and Orbit Boy. Do you know about Orbit Boy, Igor? Oh, Orbit Boy, I'm all over it. So they're collaborating to provide a low-cost, fast, reliable, and safe low Earth orbit access to space with a unique airdropped horizontal launch. Now, I don't know why they need a spaceport for that, but anyway, I'll show you a graphic shortly. So this Asia Pac region will support this low Earth orbit system for payloads up to 200 kilograms, rideshare multi-payload options. Made possible this joint venture through Space Centre Australia, Orbit Boy, which I believe are Korean and Ukrainian. Actually, it might just be Ukrainian. United Kingdom Department of Business and Trade and the Australia-United Kingdom Space Bridge. So this is something I pulled off their web about their airborne launched rocket system. Excuse me. Looks a bit like Virgin Galactic, but this is Orbit Boy. Once again, Ukrainian. Actually, in that last slide, you'll notice a picture there. The person on the right is the I'm not going to pronounce his name, ambassador to Ukraine in Australia. So, and Miroslav Zenska. Oh, yeah, there you go. So actually, Ukraine has quite a big space history, hasn't it, and heritage. It has been building boosters and space systems for a long while. I assume that that's all been interrupted by the war. Is that correct, Igor? Yeah, I'm getting a nod, yeah. So, yeah. Everything, yeah, yeah. Oh, sorry, it's not a war, it's a special operation. Sorry, Vlad, I really love you. Don't come into my house. There's been other news. Consortium has been $4 million grant to develop a lunar rover prototype. Federal government will grant two consortiums $4 million each to develop prototypes for lunar rovers as part of its landmark Moon to Mars Trailblazer initiative. Australian Remote Operations for Space and Earth, AROSE Consortium, and the EPE and Lunar Outpost Oceania Consortium, I don't know who EPE is, will each use the investment to develop semi-autonomous device that could collect regular soil samples from the moon's surface for analysis. The Moon Mars Initiative is a $150 investment over 5 years by the Australian government to drive the growth. Don't laugh at $150 million. No, it's not peanuts. Well, I suppose it is. So it's growing in the space sector. So the flagship Trailblazer element specifically aims to support NASA's space exploration programs and the plan to return humans to the moon before exploring Mars. And they intend to launch the rover by 2026. That's not far away, actually. Now, I pulled this graphic from the Australian Space Agency website. This is the artist's impression of the Australian moon base. So looks pretty darn good to me. I'll be there for that one. According to AROSE CEO Leanne Cunnold, Australian expertise in managing remote operations and robotics in complex, dangerous environments gives us a leg up in developing space technologies. This comes after Bill Nelson, the NASA administrator, and Pamela Almora, the deputy administrator, visited Australian Space Agency's headquarters in Adelaide. They also went up to Canberra and did a press club presentation, addressed the National Press Club, and said it was exciting to be working in Australia, or with Australia, on the Moon to Mars mission. And actually, Andrew Rennie sent me an audio clip. So apparently Bill has said he would love Australia to send an astronaut to space in partnership with NASA. So He didn't mention anything about who's going to pay for it, so I'm not sure how that's going to go, but it sounds like a great idea. Speaking of Australian astronauts, there's been a little bit of news. The Australian Space Agency director to undergo astronaut training in Germany. One of the most senior figures in the Australian Space Agency is set to undergo training. Catherine Bennell-Pegg, she's the Australian Space Agency's Director of Space Technology, will become the first woman to be trained by an international space agency and the first Australian woman to be trained under the Australian flag. So she began her studies in April and continue until mid-2024. However, there's no guarantee she'll be selected for a mission. She's a dual Australian UK citizen and privately applied to join the European Astronaut Corps when it was first advertised in 2021. So the fact that she's a dual Australian UK citizen made it possible for her to apply, because if you're not connected by the EU or part of Europe, actually UK isn't part of the EU anymore. Anyway, they're part of the European Space Agency. You ain't going to get a gig. So she managed to get that by that. So the selection process started in 2009, and one of only 25 people to complete the program from 22,500 eligible participants. However, last year comes after the University of Queensland and New South Wales PhD graduate, Dr. Megan Christian, will become Australia's first female astronaut after being selected to take part in the European Space Agency's training program. So they put them in a program to become astronaut candidates. They don't actually become qualified astronauts, they become candidate astronauts, from my understanding. She's currently works at the Italian National Research Council and will continue to work there while undergoing training. Unlike Bennell-Pegg, the dual citizen Christian will be technically representing the UK, hence the differentiation between under the Australian flag and UK flag. Mike, you want to add something to that? Michael Bill has been doing a little bit of research. Come up to the mic.
Yeah, I just sorry, actually, the second woman, Christian, she is a she's on the I've forgotten the word, the like the backup list. So she's not actually in the career astronaut pool. She, I believe, is a backup astronaut at this point, is her status. But I just thought it was interesting with Catherine Bennell-Pegg. I just did a little bit of research. I read a few articles and also listened to some interviews with her, as well as look at some items on the European Space Agency's website. And it was just a little bit interesting that, as Peter said, she was one of only 25 people to successfully complete the 18-month selection process. And the only reason that she was eligible to apply was that because she holds dual citizenship. Now, the reason she was given for not being successful, even though she made it through the 18 months of selection process and physical testing and psychological testing and interviews and, you know, all the usual stuff that they go through. Basically, she was told that she was an excellent candidate, but that she had not spent that much time in Europe and had a limited connection with Europe. And that's the reason she wasn't selected, according to the European Space Agency themselves. So this is despite the fact that she did complete her she completed 2 master's degrees, one at the University of Technology in Sweden, and another at Cranfield University in England. She was part of the joint European Master in Space Science and Technology program. She also did courses at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, also at University of Oxford, and she had some experience working for NASA, the European Space Agency itself, and also with Airbus. So she did have some connection to Europe, clearly, in terms of her her training and studies and so forth, but it was considered not strong enough to get her over the line to become an ESA career astronaut. So what I've been able to piece together is that afterwards, after this process took place and she was basically rejected at the very last hurdle, the Australian Space Agency and the European Space Agency agreed to have her train as an astronaut candidate as an Australian. Now, this will be only the first time that the European Space Agency has agreed to train an astronaut from an international partner country. And obviously, when you think about it, only the third country that has ever done that, or the third agency that's ever done that. So the US has done that. It has, and the Russia does it, but this makes ESA only the third space agency to have actually done this, supposedly. So what happened is that the Australian Space Agency decided to cover the cost of her participation in the basic training. So she will be trained at ESA as an Australian astronaut candidate on a cost reimbursement basis, similar to how non-American astronauts train at NASA's Johnson Space Center. So it's a similar sort of situation to that. And basically because the Australian Space Agency wanted to take up that opportunity. But it also says something about how much the European Space Agency must have thought of her as a candidate if they were willing to do that and enter into that agreement. So just to confirm, Catherine will be seconded to ESA for the training. She'll remain an employee of the Australian Space Association, Australian Space Agency, and she will not become an active member of the European Space Agency astronaut corps. So she remains an Australian astronaut, so to speak. Her training is expected to conclude in May next year. And if she's successful, she will be eligible to be selected for missions to the International Space Station, and she'll fly under the Australian flag if she does so. So I just thought it was interesting, a little bit, some of those details, because it's a little bit confusing. And how does this differ from this other woman that Pete mentioned? And yeah, so there you go.
Thanks, Mike. Interesting that she is an Australian Space Agency director and the Australian Space Agency decided to fund her training. Enough said. Anyway, we look forward to seeing her fly in space, hopefully, and her and for Megan Christian as well. That'd be fantastic. Actually, maybe the Space Association could fund my astronaut training. Come on, it can't be that expensive, really. All right, I could afford to lose a bit of weight myself, actually. All right, that's it from me. I'm going to hand over to the enigmatic Angelo Di Grazia with his international space news.
Okay, guys, this is some of the space highlights. It's not everything that happens in a month because a lot happens in a month. So these are some of my favorite highlights. So you'll know what I'm going to be talking about. SpaceX, SLS, all that sort of stuff. But I will start off with the Washington roundup. Yes, there's another budget. And mid-March, the White House proposed a $27.2 billion budget for the fiscal 24. This is a 7% increase is what they're asking for, really just to keep up with inflation. It emphasises increases for Artemis, Mars sample return, and Earth science missions. It also seeks 180 to a million to start work on a tug to deorbit the space station by 2030. It should be 20. That's a mistake. You'll find a lot of them, but it's 2030. Incidentally, we'll talk about the space station, but the Russians are still talking about pulling out in 24. But we'll get to that later. The budget, though, revealed that NASA has delayed Artemis 4. So whilst it was going to be in 2027, is now 2028. So Artemis 3 is still scheduled for late 25, and 3 years later, they go to Artemis 4. So there you go, a whole Apollo program. Artemis 3, they still trying to maintain that 25 date. They've got no hope in hell of doing it, but aspirational at this stage. Correct. The landing, the crewed landing will be Artemis 3. End of March, there's obviously trouble brewing at Capitol Hill there, because he warned that proposed across the board federal spending cuts could have devastating impact on NASA. And what are we really talking about? He's obviously contacted a Democrat mate who's in the House Appropriations Committee and basically said if the Republicans get their way, they will slash the budgets across the board, and that could be a reduction of up to 22% from 2023 levels. So NASA would be absolutely murdered if that was to happen. So that's a serious issue. That would include delaying or cancelling a number of major science missions, as well as holding work on Artemis lunar exploration effort after the Artemis 4. NASA is hardware rich. They've got bits being fabricated for Artemis 9. So if these cost cuts take effect, they're in real trouble. No, they haven't, but we'll get to that. House Appropriations have yet to hold a hearing. So it'll be interesting to see how they all go. But unfortunately, the Republicans are in a mood of make Biden look bad, so they'll cut the hell out of whatever the hell they can. If it gets through the Senate, which it probably won't, and it's got to get through Biden as well. So, sorry, mate. Okay. Space Force. Now, I put this up for a reason. They've requested $30 billion. So NASA has requested 27 and the Space Force has requested 30 billion. So I thought that was an interesting amount of money. The reason why I put it here again, we don't talk about military stuff too much, but it really is an increase on the Space Force's budget. And most of it is in the development and procurement of missile warning satellites. So more satellites going up for the United States and for launch services. Funding for low to medium orbit missile tracking. And that doubles. And then obviously launching another 15 missions. So the Space Force will have a significant impact on American launches. Okay, moving on. Now we'll talk a bit about the space station. We're going to go in depth tonight on the space station because there's a lot actually happening, a lot of interesting stuff. 2nd of March, Crew 6 launched to ISS for a 180-day mission. Falcon 9 with Endeavour launched from Kennedy Space Center with Crew 6 after they previously cancelled an attempt. Very rare where they've got a problem with a rocket. They had some issues with the igniter fluid. Fixed that, their lighter fluid, and got on with it a few days later. It docked with the ISS 24 hours after liftoff, not like the Russian Soyuz, which gets there 2 hours, 3 hours. Okay, our man from Moscow says it takes about 2 to 3 hours to dock to space station. Very good. Thanks, Igor. Okay, and there's the crew. Couple of Americans, but one Russian went up, and they're part of the crew swap. between the Soyuz and the American Crew Dragon. And then we've got one astronaut from the UAE. Crew 5, they splashed down in March. It was launched in October, 157-day mission, and they came down just outside of Tampa, Florida. And there they are. Again, that was the first of the Russian swaps that were made. Anna Kikina and the others are there. And obviously the guy from Japan. CRS-27, that's cargo resupply, recently launched just a few week ago. It will remain there for about a month before returning to Earth. The launch was not affected by a maneuver that the ISS had to perform to adjust its orbit to avoid debris from the Russian ASAT test. That still is an issue with the space station. They seem to be maneuvering. They also maneuvered out the way of another satellite too. So it's not just space junk, but it's a serious issue. Axiom Space. On the 12th of May, Axiom 2 mission for a 14-day mission to the ISS will take place. Axiom Space is a private venture, and these are the astronauts, 2 Americans. Peggy Whitson, we know from, she was a NASA astronaut, and the other 2 are from Saudi Arabia. Axiom Space, Axiom 3 will launch in November 2023. NASA just announced that they'd given a go-ahead to allow astronauts to go into the space station. So it'll be a 4-person crew that's yet to be announced. Axiom flew its first mission last April and is gearing up for a second scheduled for May. That space station image is the Axiom space modules. And the idea there is that they're going to dock to the space station. By the time they deorbit the space station, those modules will free float and become its own private space station. I suspect they're going to have to put a couple of other modules like power and a few other bits and pieces, but it's pretty well advanced. And they're certainly under construction too, those modules. All right, now, cargo resupply, CRS-2 contract. That's interesting because the space station, NASA has put together, has supported private space stations. However, they've extended the CRS-2, which is the cargo resupply 2 contract, to 2030. So it'll be a sole source extension of SpaceX, Northrop Grumman, and we've got Sierra Space with their Dream Chaser. Those extensions could cover missions from January 27 to December 2030. NASA has previously announced its intent to end the station by 2030. And these are the 3 that have won the CRS-2 contracts. We've seen the Cygnus fly, we've seen Cargo Dragon, but we've yet to see Sierra Nevada's Dream Chaser, which appears to be on schedule for the end of the year. So all depends what happens to the ULA Vulcan rocket, which we'll talk about. There's the Cygnus, there's Cargo Dragon, and there's Dream Chaser. This picture without tiles was probably taken about 5 months ago. It's now covered in tiles. Soyuz leak. Russia launched an uncrewed replacement Soyuz spacecraft, MS-23, which was slated for a manned mission, but they brought it forward, launched it unmanned, or uncrewed, I should say, in February 2023 to bring home 2 cosmonauts and a US astronaut. This is after the original capsule, MS-22, appears to have been struck by a micrometeorite. That's the official word, but it's starting to appear that it could be a manufacturing defect because the cargo module that was there before that had a similar hole in a similar place. The probability of getting struck by a meteorite in the same place is pretty astronomical, pardon the pun. So they may have a bit of a manufacturing issue, which they're going to have to deal with. and no, I haven't heard that one being resurrected again. So MS-22 will undock in the next few days. It'll just re-enter, and it'll be interesting to see how that performs, to be honest. I don't know if you can see it, but that's supposed to illustrate the spray of coolant into space, and there's MS-23. Deorbit of the ISS. NASA projects spending up to $1 billion on a tug to deorbit the ISS at the end of its life by 2030. In its $27.2 billion budget request, it's included $180 million to start on that work. It's one of the few new programs that is actually in the budget. But they reckon by the time they get some of the smart commercial people on board, it might cost a little bit less than $1 billion. The tug is intended to provide redundancy to plans to use cargo spacecraft. Previously, they wanted to deorbit the space station with Soyuz modules or Progress modules. To Progress. So this is a sort of a backup plan in case that all comes to naught. The tug is the biggest new program in the budget, and the future of ISS. I'm going to show you a video. So enjoy this. These are some of the other things related to space stations, the Lunar Gateway, of course. And by the way, the Lunar Gateway, which is scheduled to go up probably next year, is going up on a Falcon Heavy. So it'll go up as the two modules will fit into the fairing, and off it goes. Okay, enjoy this.
2030 is quickly approaching, and NASA has begun their planning process for the mission that will deorbit the International Space Station, capping off the decade with a fiery retirement for one of humanity's greatest achievements. The news comes from some additional details released by NASA on March 13th, which showed that their 2024 budget proposal included a request for $180 million, a price that NASA says will give them a healthy start for the project. While previously the plan was to use attached cargo spacecraft like Russia's Progress vehicle to slowly maneuver the station into a decaying orbit, the agency has decided that deorbiting something as large as the ISS requires more control and has opted for building an orbital tug to push the ISS into a trajectory that ends over the South Pacific. Kathy Lueders, NASA's Associate Administrator for Space Operations, said the agency has calculated that this plan would cost just short of $1 billion, but that's not where they want to end it. She explained that NASA would rather get that cost down by seeking outside help with a request for proposals. NASA has been making great use of commercial agencies over the last couple of years, and a quick glance to the future shows that they are not planning on slowing down anytime soon. So it isn't strange at all that NASA's budgetary plans for this big of an operation would include driving the cost down by hiring a commercial company to manage it. NASA is always looking for redundancy, Lueders said while discussing the plans, and you can see that not just with their plans to use commercial partners for the ISS deorbit, but also with the station's replacements. Because we're not going to be getting rid of what was, for a long time, humanity's only long-duration habitat in space without putting more stations, specifically more advanced space stations, into orbit to replace it. Right now, most of the hype is for NASA's Lunar Gateway station. This pivotal habitat will be assembled in a near-rectilinear halo orbit around the Moon, an orbit which will ensure near-constant communication with Earth. The Gateway will be made up of modules from public and private partners from around the world and will not only give us a stable platform to study our Moon over the long term, but will provide our exploratory missions with a crucial jumping-off point to refuel and set off towards Mars and the outer solar system. Gateway will be starting its mission in late 2024 if all goes well. But it's hardly the only government-run station that is planned. Russia's Roscosmos is planning on starting their own station in 2027. The Russian Orbital Service Station will be the Russians' first station since the Mir deorbited in 2011. Plans for the Mir 2 were transformed into the International Space Station later. Ross will be orbiting way up at the 400-kilometer range in a sun-synchronous orbit, so it can monitor the entire surface of the Earth. They're also planning their own lunar orbital station, but the designs are as old as 2007, and there hasn't been much more work done on it since. No news yet on how far along these station plans are, but with Russia most likely pulling out of the International Space Station program in 2024, it's a good bet that they'll push hard to get their own station up so they'll not be left behind. And speaking of not being left behind, we have China's Tiangong station. China was shut out of the International Space Station program, so they just decided to make their own, and did so in spectacular fashion. The station is currently complete to the baseline China had planned for, and more modules are going up soon to join the 3 already in orbit. The whole station came together in just under 2 years, which is an outstanding pace to set. Adding to that, the Chinese agency has repeatedly pledged to allow other countries to use their station, a classy bit of generosity considering they were shuttered previously. And finally, the Indian Space Research Organization is planning on putting a smaller station for themselves in about 2035. Plans for the station had to be pushed back due to some complications regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, but the Indian agency has been wanting to get a station up since they proposed it back in 2019. Then we have the many, many stations proposed by commercial companies. The biggest and most well-funded, which are Starlab, Axiom Station, and the Orbital Reef. Starlab is a project designed by Voyager Space's NanoRacks company Lockheed Martin and Airbus. Axiom Station is designed by Axiom Space and is planned to be a module for the ISS before breaking off and forming its own space station before the ISS end-of-life date. And Blue Origin's Orbital Reef is planned to pull together most of billionaire Jeff Bezos' companies, along with Boeing, Sierra Space, and a couple of others, to create a large space tourism hub and laboratory. And there are plenty of other stations planned, of course, but the scope of work we're looking at here is tremendous. By 2040, humanity will have gone from only one semi-permanent orbiting habitat to many. We are going to explode into the cislunar space at a speed that will likely be talked about for centuries. The ISS blazing into the South Pacific will mark the end of an era and the true beginning of our new space race.
Okay, so hopefully those that worry that we won't have presence in orbit need not worry. It looks like a lot of action on many fronts.
2030 is...
Okay, we'll talk about commercial crew. And the commercial crew, as you know, comprised of the CST-100 Boeing and SpaceX Crew Dragon. We're not going to talk about Crew Dragon because they've already had 6 missions to the space station, but we are going to talk about Boeing. And there's the Starliner. That's what it looks like inside. And the first crewed flight of the Starliner, surprise, surprise, has slipped again. So 23rd of March, NASA announced that the crew flight test, previously scheduled for late April, would now take place after the Axiom to AX-2 private astronaut mission in May. NASA didn't disclose a reason for the delay beyond the time needed to assess readiness and complete verification work on the spacecraft, and did not provide a new launch date. They're basically saying the end of summer, which is probably June, July. Refueling the spacecraft and concerns around it and flight software testing and validation appears to be the reason. I think NASA are all over the software that Boeing's provided to try to make sure they don't get a repeat of what happened on the first flight. The delay also avoids a conflict with the first Vulcan Centaur launch scheduled in early May from the same launch pad that will host the Atlas V launch of Starliner. So a lot of excuses going around, but the reality is Boeing have really stuffed up, and they have spent already, I heard a number in the order of $600 to $700 million of their own money, because it was a cost, it was a fixed price contract to get this thing going. And it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Boeing walk away from this. You heard it first here. Some more conspiracy. But Boeing have got to the point, because you remember last time they had problems with the valves. They've gone to the actual manufacturer that was a subcontractor to Rocketdyne which built those valves, they've now bypassed Rocketdyne because there's a big blue going on between Rocketdyne and Boeing. They've gone direct to the subby to try to fix up the valve. So it's a bit of a schmozzle. They did. They got 400. Well, there's a reason for that. SpaceX, when they got that, only got about $2.5 billion, and Boeing got about 4 point something. But SpaceX got less because NASA had already funded Cargo Dragon, right? So NASA had already provided funds to develop that particular project. That's the reason why there's a disparity between the two. Boeing had to start from scratch. But here we are. You know, December 2019 was the first test, which was an absolute foul up. And then 19th of May, 2022, last year, 3 years after SpaceX actually did the same thing, they also had concerns, and they had the valve sticking at the Cape, rust, if you recall, in the valves. Who would have thought that at Florida? But anyway, June, July 23 was April, is now the first crewed flight, and it probably doesn't come into operation until probably next year. And what's sad about it is the CST-100 doesn't seem to have a lot of other users. Now, the orbital reef may save it. That's the Blue Origin space station, but yeah, they struggled. There's some pictures of it launching. There's it in space with some dummy astronauts, and these are the real astronauts that they all deserve a Medal of Honor for taking the flight that's coming up. Suni Williams and Barry Wilmore, I think, are veteran astronauts. I know certainly Suni is. So anyway, let's talk about Artemis. Launching to the moon. There's Artemis 1 on the pad. That was the one I took on the pad. There's one near the moon and one just before loss of signal as it orbited the moon. Artemis 1 successfully launched to the moon in November of 22 last year and returned in December. Went into a distant rectilinear orbit. The results of this successful test are currently being assessed. NASA sees no major problems for Artemis 1 mission that would affect Artemis 2. Artemis 2 will be next year, November, no earlier than. But they are working a couple of small problems. One is there was a greater amount of charred material removed from the Orion capsule's heat shield than expected, but noted it didn't pose a problem. Issue with the power system on Orion's service module, and repairing damage to the mobile launcher that was greater than expected. So they're working on those. No, I don't think it's quite that bad, Len. Len suggested that there was not enough power. I don't know the details, Len, other than... Yeah. All right, Len. Artemis 3 lunar landing is still targeted for the end of 2025. There's the, that was the Orion capsule. And this is actually the core stage that's just been completed in Michoud in New Orleans. And they've now got to put the RS-25 engines on the back of it. So, you know, they're moving. They're going to deliver this probably in the summer. And then it just sits there at the Cape getting integrated until a November launch of 24. Artemis 4 will launch in 2028, as I said before, with the SLS Block 1B rocket, which incorporates the more powerful exploration upper stage. Testing of the hardware for the EUS will take place this year, and it is taking place. Lunar Gateway fabrication continues for launch in, it said November 24, but probably slip into 25. Ground support equipment upgrades continue at the Kennedy Space Center. This is the Block 1. This is the version that gives us Artemis 1 to 3. and it has just the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. These are the variants. Block 1 is the current one flying. Block 2, which will be Artemis 4 in 27 or 28, will have the interim, we'll have the exploration upper stage, which has the 4 engines on the back of it. That's it in comparison. So it gives it quite significant capability. And that's what it looks like for all the Apollo aficionados in the room. That's what it looks like in comparison to the third stage of the Saturn V and Apollo stack. They also have to start building a new launch tower, but they've got till 2028 to build it, so no hurry. And this is the Artemis 2 profile, which is Apollo 13 repeat. Igor. Yes, Apollo 8. Did I say that? Apollo 8. Actually, Apollo 13 was free. No, it's not an Apollo 8. It's an Apollo 13 repeat. Apollo 8 orbited the moon for about 10 orbits or something. Yes, it was. Yeah. So it was a free return trajectory for Apollo 13. Igor. No. It wasn't launched that way, but that's what ended up happening. Anyway, so we're going to do a repeat of what was done 60 years ago, something like that. Yep. Now, lunar spacesuits. This is a significant development. NASA selected Axiom last September to develop suits for Artemis missions, starting with Artemis 3, no earlier than 2025, for a contract sum of $228 million. NASA had already spent $450 million on the spacesuit before that, and it was going nowhere. And so they decided to tender it, and Axiom won it. Now, admittedly, the 228 is a little bit misleading because they're using all the hardware and all the plans and all the research that was done when NASA spent $450 million on it. So, they've had a bit of a leg up to produce their spacesuit. NASA and Axiom Space unveiled a prototype of the space suit Axiom is developing on the 15th of March. The Axiom Extra Vehicle Mobility Unit, the AXEMU, leverages technology NASA developed for earlier designs. It's designed to be more flexible than previous suit designs and fit a wide range of astronauts. I think they're up to the 95th percentile, so the word goes. It will be used for missions starting with Artemis 3 in the mid-20s. NASA awarded Axiom that amount of money under a service contract. Okay, refer to the video. So let's watch this. This is interesting because the moon suit will not be black. It was black for the presentation. It will be white, has to be. The other thing is that spacesuit was designed by the movie designer that did, I think it was the Apple show, what was it called, for All Mankind? I know it was certainly by a Hollywood designer, but yeah, let's watch it. It's pretty good, this.
On March 15th, Axiom Space unveiled the brand new spacesuit that will be worn by Artemis 3 astronauts on their return to the lunar surface this decade. This is NASA's first new spacesuit design since the EVA suit created for the Space Shuttle program, and those are still used to service the ISS to this day. Axiom was awarded the $228 million contract to design a new suit back in September of 2022. This came after the catastrophic failure of NASA's original Artemis spacesuit plan that suffered from extreme cost overruns and a significantly delayed production schedule. If we compare the NASA suit from 2019 with the Axiom suit in 2023, I think we can agree that this was all for the best. The suit shown off in the conference last week definitely looked more flexible than any spacesuit we've seen before, including the old Apollo-era lunar suits, even if Buddy did require a walking stick to help keep him upright. Remember, these suits are made for the moon's gravity, which is 1/6 that of Earth's, so the balance is going to be a little off for walking around a stage. You should probably disregard the stylish black covering too. While it was created by Esther Marquis, the costume designer on the Apple Plus show For All Mankind, this covering is a stand-in to cover up internal components for the unveiling. Black coverings would dangerously increase the amount of heat absorption on the moon, and Axiom pointed out that the black portions of this design will be white by the time that they hit that dusty lunar surface. The helmet features a light bar to help the astronauts see in those shadowy craters, and is also equipped with an HD camera for live streaming POV footage back to Earth. The new gloves are built for maximum dexterity and ease of movement, so that astronauts don't get hand cramps while working on the moon, and the ingress and egress from the suit is made easy by a back hatch design, so they jump in feet first, shimmy their arms and head into place, and then close up the back and they are good to go. The show model was meant to debut the main new features of these suits, mobility. Our demonstration astronaut was able to pull off a bunch of squats and lunges in his new spacesuit with relative ease. He could even crouch down to touch the floor and then stand back up with a little help from his stick. Getting around in even the ISS-era gear is reportedly a pain, and that's before we account for the problems that have begun to show themselves with age, like the leaks and condensation buildup in the station's EMUs last year, which halted spacewalk operations for most of that year. The moon is a challenging place to design for, along with the usual features needed for a spacesuit, things like pressurization, carbon dioxide removal, waste management. This new suit has to hold up to increased solar and cosmic radiation, temperatures that fluctuate from dangerously high to incredibly low, and even the possibility of micrometeoroid impacts. The biggest challenge is actually going to be thermal regulation. The first use for these suits will be on Artemis 3, which will be a landing at the lunar South Pole in 2025 or so. Most of the cratered landscape there is perpetually in shadow and will be extremely cold. In some places, it can reach minus 253 degrees Celsius. Axiom specifically designed the boots of their new spacesuit to keep astronauts' feet warm as they trudge through the icy regolith. NASA has actually put out 2 contracts for suits, one to Axiom for the new lunar get-ups and one to Collins Aerospace for gear that will replace the aging space station units, because these two are different applications and it makes sense to need 2 different suits. But so far, Axiom suits look promising, and we can imagine astronauts will be very happy to get this upgrade for Artemis 3.
There you go. Pretty cool. And the flexibility is just astounding how they've done that. And remember that the 2 of the big issues are going to be, how do you prevent the dust from accumulating on the spacesuit itself and clogging up the gears and the ball bearings? Second, how do you stop the dust getting to the astronauts? That dust is pretty bad stuff. It's sharp, angular, micro sized rocks. It'll be bad. So quite a challenge. Now again, they've got 2 years to really develop it, and hopefully they've done well.
On March 15th,
let's go back. Okay, let's talk about SpaceX. I always show these slides as a comparison to the Saturn V. Statistics: Saturn V thrust 7.6 million, SLS thrust will be 8.8. SpaceX Super Heavy 33 Raptors will be 17 million, twice. Pretty big rocket. This is the size of the fairing. Starship, which will be part of the human landing system, has a lot of volume to play with. New Glenn, pretty big. Falcon Heavy, big-ish. There's a number of variants of the Starship. The one that you'll see mostly is the Crew, but there's a bit of conjecture because there's a couple of bullet-shaped Starships that have been built that are sitting at Boca in Texas, and they've got no heat shield. They just look like the tanker. And so the speculation is it a prototype tanker? Is it a prototype lunar lander? We don't know. Go to Brownville, Texas. It's right on the Rio Grande, right on the border with Mexico, and it's right on a peninsula. In the foreground is this has changed a lot, by the way. The launch site is right next to the beach. and the production site is further up the road. And this is what's affectionately called the rocket garden, but they move starships in and out of that particular area. But they've just recently acquired a place just up the road. You can see at the top of that picture, you'll see this is where Starbase is, but they've acquired an old gunnery range, and it's called Macy's. That's the Rio Grande, by the way. On the other side of the river is Mexico. But they're doing a lot of testing, particularly pressure testing of the various components of starships there. And as you can see, it's not a long trek up the highway. There's only one road that goes from Brownsville down to Starbase. Okay, progress continues at a rapid pace, and it really is speeding up. An April 2023 first launch of Starship is being targeted by SpaceX. And I think they're serious this time. No, I'm getting to that. Pacing activities include complete the launch mount. They're working quite speedily at blast protecting it, covering it up. You'll see that shortly. Complete the water deluge system. SpaceX, again, in the early days, tried to avoid it, but reality bites, and they had to produce a water deluge system, which they're now installing at Boca, and they've actually got one going at the Cape as well. But they got to get the FAA license to address 80+ requirements that came out some time ago. They've got the state of Texas behind them because, you know, Brownsville Chamber of Commerce and all the Mr. Abbott, you know, governor of Texas, they all want SpaceX there. And but the FAA are going to make sure the crosses are crossed and T's crossed and I's dotted and all the rest of it. So there is talk, though, that they're expecting it soon. So it's not negative, but this will be the pacing item. SpaceX continues to achieve its milestones with its HLS contract. Again, NASA always talked about them in glowing terms, so but we don't hear anything about it. So I'm now going to play a video that actually gives a good update of where they are in all this. And by the way, the first launch is going to be basically a 3/4 orbit. The Super Heavy will splash down in the Atlantic, and it will actually, I think they will attempt a landing if it gets to that point and just do one of those, you know, in-ocean landings. And that's the sort of profile. It boosts back and comes back. That'll be something to see, let me tell you. And the Starship actually will deorbit near Hawaii in very deep water, I suspect. But they will try to land it in the water if it survives. And there's some pretty big ifs. Elon, he often underestimates, but he sort of put a 50-50 proposition as to whether the thing blows up taking off. So it'll be, again, something to see. Here's the video. This is a good update of what's going on right now.
SpaceX team is working around the clock at the Starbase to complete the remaining activities before the highly anticipated orbital test flight of Starship. Let's dive right in and see how the team is pushing the boundaries of space exploration with their unparalleled speed and dedication. Starship 24 is currently at the Rocket Garden, and teams have installed all the thermal protection system tiles necessary for the test flight. Andrew from Rocket Future recently spotted teams working around the flight termination system of Ship 24. A flight termination system is a safety mechanism used in rockets to ensure public safety if the launch vehicle goes out of control or off course during its flight. The system is designed to destroy the rocket in flight by triggering an explosion in case it poses a threat to populated areas, critical infrastructure, or national security. The flight termination system is usually controlled by a remote ground station or an onboard computer that monitors the rocket's trajectory and status during the flight. The installation of the flight termination system indicates that all the pre-launch checkouts for Ship 24 have been completed and the vehicle is ready for flight. Booster 7 is currently stationed at the launch site, and no major work has been done on the vehicle for the past 2 weeks. It looks like the booster was removed from the orbital launch mount only to complete the remaining work on the launch mount. What is currently holding back SpaceX from announcing a launch date are the work that remains on the launch mount, installation of the water deluge system, and the FAA launch license. In a recent tweet, Elon Musk said that assuming the launch license takes a few weeks, a launch in April is highly likely. Before the launch can take place, Ship 24 will need to be transported back to the launch site, and Booster 7 must be mounted on the orbital launch mount. The next step will be a full stack, and only then will there be more clarity on the path to the launch date. The orbital launch mount received its final protective shielding last week. The shields will protect the launch mount piping, manifolds, control panels, and other components from engine exhaust and debris during liftoff. The doors installed on some of the shields will ensure workers can continue to access essential parts inside the launch mount. The construction of the 6 launch mount legs on which the launch platform rests was completed in mid-2021. The legs were filled with rebar and concrete after construction, but the vertical extensions installed above them were hollow until last week. All this time, SpaceX had done nothing to strengthen them. A few days ago, teams installed concrete injection ports on the leg extensions and began pumping concrete into them. The vertical extensions are currently the weakest parts of the launch mount, but that problem will be solved once all the extensions are filled with concrete. SpaceX conducted the first cryogenic-proof test of Starship 25 at the company's Massey's test facility last Tuesday night. It was the first time a Starship pre-launch test was conducted outside the launch complex. The footage of the test from Lab Padre is not very clear because the test site is located several kilometers away from Starbase and the test took place at night. But still we can see that SpaceX filled the methane tank of the ship almost half with cryogenic liquid nitrogen during the test. Since SpaceX owns the road that leads to Massey's from Highway 4, no road closure is necessary to conduct Starship testing there. We can expect more Ship 25 testing in the coming days, so don't forget to keep an eye on the Lab Padre Raptor roost cam that tracks tests at Massey's. Starship 26 was moved to the Rocket Garden on March 19 to make room inside the high bay for Starship 28 stacking operations. Ship 26 is currently attached to a crane at the Rocket Garden, and teams are preparing to lift the prototype onto a Raptor installation stand. Ship 26 has already completed 2 cryogenic-proof tests, and once all 6 engines are installed, SpaceX will begin Ship 26's static fire tests. The common dome of Starship 28 was moved into the high bay last Monday evening. On early Wednesday morning, the nose cone payload bay forward dome assembly of Ship 28 was stacked atop the common dome section. This is a new stacking pattern for SpaceX. Before Ship 28, SpaceX stacks the forward section atop the tank section to complete Starship's primary structure. Ship 28 is the first Starship prototype to be stacked in a top-down pattern. The methane tank section of Super Heavy Booster 10 was moved into the Mega Bay on March 18. The methane tank was lifted with the help of an overhead crane and stacked atop the oxygen tank section on Wednesday morning, effectively completing the primary structure of Booster 10. Booster 10 is the 8th fully stacked Super Heavy prototype. Next to Booster 10 inside the Mega Bay is Booster 9, which is currently receiving its 33 Raptor engines. Teams have also begun stacking the ring section of Booster 11 inside the Mega Bay.
So we've got Ship 24 and Booster 7 ready to launch. They've got Starship 25, 26, 28 already almost built, and they've got the heavy lifter 7. They've got 8, 9, 10, and then 11. So seven is they've used it for testing and other components. The reality is these guys are speeding up their manufacturing. So SpaceX is certainly serious. Would not surprise me if they pull off an April launch. But again, it'll all depend on the FAA. Everything else is targeting for April. So pretty cool. This is now SpaceX have also got the facility. And here's an interesting thing, an interesting observation. Boca Chica, remember at the time, they were getting a lot of resistance from the FAA and whatever. And so Elon said, I'm moving to Florida. And they started to build all the facilities in Florida. The Florida facilities have slowed down a bit. And I suspect that is because of confidence that they're getting out of Boca Chica. And further, at Boca Chica, they're building 2 new big buildings there. There's some serious piling going on in some of the in some of the part of the manufacturing facility. So SpaceX seem to be focusing back to Boca. Florida is a little bit on the back burner, but I think it's Elon's way of playing the politicians. Whichever way it goes, I'm ready to pivot to one or the other. So pretty cool. This is, sorry, go back. This is a recent picture of the Pad 39A. As I said, things have slowed up there, but they've got the water towers. They've got, they haven't yet got the launch platform on, but they've got the legs there. Anyway, that's moving. That's Pad 39A. This is Roberts Road. They've built a factory. The factory at the top of the page was there before. The new factory is down south. It's not actually south, it's west. And you will see in the middle of the picture a number of tower sections, and they're for another tower, Starship Tower, but nobody's quite sure where it's going to go. There's speculation it might go in landing zone 1, or it might go for the upgrade of Launch Complex or SLC 40, where they're now man rating it to allow Crew Dragons to be launched from there. So they're going to need a tower with an escape, system and pivot arm. Reason, NASA's scared to death that Starship will blow up on Pad 39A and destroy their only way of getting into space, which is Pad 39A proper. So they're trying to hedge all bets. So we still don't know where the tower sections are going. They're the tower sections. It's almost the full complete tower. Could go, as I said, landing zone 1. Landing zone 1 is the old SLAC 13, NASA SLAC 13, and it's down there on Missile Alley. Michael has just asked that there was a rumor that they might be giving up landing zone 1. I have not heard that. Interesting. All sorts of conjecture goes around up there, that's for sure. Just so you know, you'd have to look at the map, but SpaceX occupy a couple of pads. Blue Origin occupy 36, ULA occupy 41, Relativity Space occupy the old pad 16. And recently NASA gave to some private groups, new private groups, other pads to work on. For example, if you remember where all the Mercury astronauts were launched off that big concrete platform with a ramp, well, they've given that to a private group to do something with. But, you know, NASA would like them to consider some of the heritage of the sites, but the sites, unfortunately, are in really bad disrepair. So you take your pick as to what you really do with them. All right. And in future, there's Pad 39A in the foreground. There's 39B with Artemis. There's the old Pads 39C and D. They could be future Starship launch pads. SpaceX General. I just wanted to bring your attention to SpaceX because they are going gangbusters. They really are. It's an unprecedented dominance in the space industry, and I'm not saying it as a SpaceX fanboy. The numbers stack up to prove that. It just keeps going. In 2022, they've had 61 launches. Okay, already they've had 20 out of 20 successful launches up to today. 100% success rate. Aspirational launches, they want to do probably double that. So they will beat hands down, you know, countries like China in launch rates. Booster landings, 181 out of 202. So it's become more than just a novelty. It's now mainstream. This is how you get rockets back. Booster reuse, 152. So you can see how SpaceX is able to reduce its costs significantly by reusing these boosters. I think the booster that's been used most often is, I think, 14 flights or 12 or 14. 14. It's a lot. Hell of a lot. Best turnaround time, they've turned around a rocket in 5 days and 3 hours at the Cape, which is pretty good. It's not the hour turnaround I think that Elon always wanted, but 5 days, 3 hours is pretty spectacular. Yeah, landing and launch, relaunch. Amazing. Of a booster. Pretty amazing. So the facts speak for themselves, right? You can see the Falcon Heavy and the Falcon 9. And you'll also see Falcon Heavy there. And you'll see a very typical landing on a barge, which has just become mainstream. The only thing that's improved since 2017 is the fact that the stream doesn't cut out anymore. There was a recent launch, I forget which one it was, but it was crystal clear from takeoff to landing. It was just superb. If you get to watch it, it's the last 2 launches, brilliant telecast. No one does it like SpaceX. Certainly NASA doesn't, India doesn't, nobody does it. The telecast, Boeing certainly doesn't. SpaceX ought to be, the only one that comes close is Electron, and that's still miles away from the telecast that SpaceX produce. And of course, Crew Dragon. Relativity space, that's something that's very interesting. In 22nd of March last week, it launched its first Terran 1 rocket, and it really exceeded expectations, even though it failed to reach orbit. It was the it was a major launch of a methane/liquid oxygen rocket. They thought it would be the first to get into space, but it didn't. I'll go through this. It was substantially 3D printed. So 80%, 75 to 80% of it is 3D printed, which is a miracle in itself because they could churn out, how many rockets in no time flat. Terran 1 lifted off from the Cape in a flight called Good Luck, Have Fun. The rocket's first stage performed as planned and it passed through max Q. The rocket's upper stage separated 3 minutes after liftoff, but its engine appeared to malfunction and shut down seconds later. The rocket, and it really kept the rocket from going further. Despite the failure, Relativity Space still celebrated the launch, arguing that it demonstrated the rocket's 3D printed structures could handle the rigors of max Q, really, because that's where they get the most dynamic loads on the structure. So we're going to see a little video of this. Oh, this is a picture that a good colleague of mine at the Cape, Greg, took in the helicopter that I think Dave calls it the Widowmaker helicopter. They once a week, once every 2 weeks, Greg gets up in this little helicopter and takes pictures of the Cape. But that was it on pad Slick 16, not so long ago. And there it is. And there's the launch. And here's the video.
Terran 1, a 3D printed rocket designed and built by Relativity Space, failed shortly after lifting off from a launch pad in Cape Canaveral on Wednesday, March 22nd. The test flight, dubbed Good Luck Have Fun, lifted off from Launch Complex 16 on Wednesday evening, after 2 scrubbed countdowns earlier this month. Since it was a demonstration mission, the rocket was not carrying a functioning payload. Instead, it carried a small aluminum alloy ring to space, which was one of the first metal 3D prints Relativity made using its first generation of 3D printers. Terran 1 performed well initially. For example, it passed max Q, the area of maximum aerodynamic pressure, 1 minute and 20 seconds after liftoff.
Max Q.
Relativity has stated that passing this point of the flight will prove the structural integrity of the 3D printed rocket under the most extreme conditions it is expected to encounter during flight.
We just completed a major step in proving to the world that 3D printed rockets are structurally viable.
The first and second stages separated successfully 2 minutes and 45 seconds after liftoff, but something went wrong shortly after that. The second stage was supposed to coast 6 seconds after separation before igniting its single vacuum-optimized Eon engine. However, despite visual indications that the engine ignited, no useful thrust was produced, and the upper stage failed to enter the intended orbit. Relativity said that more details about the anomaly would be announced later.
But maiden launches are always exciting, and today's flight was no exception. Although we didn't reach orbit, we significantly exceeded our key objectives for this first launch, and that objective was to gather data at max Q, one of the most demanding phases of flight, and achieve stage separation.
Our team will now carefully analyze this data to determine what led to this outcome.
The mission, despite failing to enter orbit, was an important breakthrough for relativity space and helped demonstrate the viability of its ambitious manufacturing approach. Relativity believes its 3D printing approach will make building orbital-class rockets much faster than traditional methods. The company aims to create rockets from raw materials in as few as 60 days. Relativity Space is already making progress on its much larger next-generation launch vehicle, Terran R. It is expected to be a fully reusable launch system with an anticipated payload capacity of 20,000 kilograms to low Earth orbit. Terran R's first launch is currently planned for no earlier than 2024. Please watch my previous videos to learn in detail about Terran 1 and Terran R rockets. Links in the description.
There you go. That's pretty cool. All right, let's talk about ULA. We're all expecting the Vulcan Centaur rocket to be launched soon. 4th of May, no earlier than 4th of May has been announced. There it is. Sorry, 4th of May. Yeah. What? May the 4th be with you. Yeah. I wonder if that was deliberate. Anyway, the Vulcan rocket was taken to Slack 41 in February, and tanking tests were conducted on the 10th and 16th of this month, only a few weeks ago. The next step is to the inaugural launch includes conducting a wet dress rehearsal, performing flight readiness review, and a full terminal countdown sequence, and of course, do an engine firing test to demonstrate that the BE-4s actually work. First launch is expected no earlier than May the 4th. Vulcan is powered by 2 Blue Origin BE-4 engines. Deliveries of these engines were a problem, which I'd been reporting on constantly. BE-4 is the largest American rocket engine, slightly more powerful than the Raptor, and continues to go through qualification testing. So they're still testing this engine repeatedly to get the bugs out of it. BE-4 is a methane, natural gas, liquid oxygen engine. And if you saw Terran 1 go up and you watched it, it's got this beautiful blue glow of an exhaust. It just looks magnificent because it hasn't got the hydrocarbons that kerosene has. Now, clearly, using BE-4s on Vulcan is a good test for Blue Origin because they're going to use these rocket engines for their New Glenn rocket. New Glenn, unfortunately, won't fly this year, but will probably fly next year. The first mission of the Vulcan is going to launch the astrobotic lander to the moon. Not bad for a first mission. The second mission will actually fly Dream Chaser. They were hoping to get a Department of Defense mission up before the end of the year. Unlikely. It'll go into the new year. So Tori Bruno from ULA will be under a lot of pressure from the Defense Department as to get their payloads up. And there it is with the 2 BE-4 engines. And there's the Centaur being tested at Marshall Spaceflight Center in Alabama. And there it is being taken out to the launch site. There it is being stood upright. And there it is doing the cryo testing only a few days ago. And there's the astrobotic Peregrine lander. And there's Dream Chaser coming up at the end of the year. Interestingly enough, on March the 23rd, the owners of ULA reportedly considering selling the joint venture. So that's an interesting development. Sources said Boeing and Lockheed Martin, which hold 50% stakes in ULA, have engaged ex-company to contact potential purchasers. But as of this point, we don't know who the purchasers might be. You got to put Blue Origin there, don't you? Somewhere. So it'll be interesting to see how this pans out. Because ULA, despite their cost, have been very effective. They've had a phenomenal success rate, and they've been, I guess, the the workhorse of the Defense Department for America. So there you go. Blue Origin. We know him. He's doing all sorts of things. And there's the New Glenn rocket. And there's the B4. There's New Glenn supposedly launching. These are the facilities at the Cape. But this, what I want to talk about is just the New Shepard failure. Blue Origin continues to investigate the anomaly on a New Shepard suborbital flight nearly 6 months ago. The crew capsule on a payload-only mission last September fired its abort motors a minute after liftoff, safely landing under parachute. So the booster basically failed. Blue Origin currently said the investigation is ongoing and the company has no timelines for return to flight, but planned to resume launches as soon as they were ready. So we will talk about, the video will describe what they found in terms of the failure.
Blue Origin has completed and released its findings from the investigation of its NS-23 in-flight anomaly. Blue Origin's New Shepard rocket suffered an anomaly during an uncrewed space mission on 12 September last year. The mission wasn't carrying any space tourists on board. Instead, it was a cargo flight that aimed to take 36 payloads on a brief tour to suborbital space and back. The launch appeared to be going as expected until about T+1 minutes. However, at an altitude of around 8,500 meters, the plume from the hydrogen-fueled BE-3 engine that powers the rocket changed its appearance, and the vehicle began to swerve slightly off vertical. The capsule's launch abort motor activated instantly, generating a quick pulse of thrust to propel the craft away from the failing rocket. The capsule reached a peak altitude of about 11.4 kilometers and then stabilized itself as it deployed 3 drogue parachutes and 3 main chutes for a relatively gentle ride back to the ground. The capsule touched down near the launch site about 5.5 minutes after liftoff. More than 6 months after the incident, on March 24, Blue Origin released its findings in the company website. The direct cause of the mishap was a thermostructural failure of the engine nozzle, which caused off-axis thrust and activated the crew capsule escape system. The crew capsule escape system worked as designed, bringing the capsule and its payloads to a safe landing with no damage. As part of the response to the crew capsule escape, the propulsion module commanded the shutdown of the booster's BE-3PM engine and followed an unpowered trajectory to impact the ground within the designated hazard area. Testing of the damaged engine began immediately following the mishap and found that the nozzle operated at hotter temperatures than previous design configurations. Forensic evaluation of the recovered nozzle fragments showed clear evidence of thermal damage and hot streaks resulting from increased operating temperatures. The Mishap Review Board determined that design changes made to the engine's boundary layer cooling system accounted for an increase in nozzle heating and explained the hot streaks present. Blue Origin is currently implementing corrective actions, including design changes to the engine combustion chamber and operating parameters. The company expects to return to flight soon, with a reflight of the NS-23 payloads.
Had unexpected consequences as a result.
Blue Origin.
Now, the final, I think this is the final one. We talk Japan. The first is Japan have produced a rocket that was to replace its previous H2 rocket, and it much cheaper, much easier, less parts, all the rest of it, but it failed on its first launch. Wasn't the booster, it was the second stage that failed, a bit like Terran 1. The rocket lifted off from the Tanegashima Space Launch Center, and the vehicle's first stage, along with the 2 solid boosters, appeared to work well. However, controllers were unable to confirm the rocket's second stage ignited as telemetry showed the vehicle's losing speed. The H3 second stage showed abnormal voltage levels during its failed launch. It was not clear what caused the voltage issue and how it might have prevented the engine from igniting, but it looks like the engine just didn't fire. Japan Science Minister said her ministry will work with JAXA to investigate the failure as promptly and as thoroughly as possible, and I'm sure they will. The H3 is Japan's next generation launch vehicle intended to replace the existing H2A at a much lower cost per launch. That's what it looked like. That's what it looked like launching. Now I'm going to talk about Japan's lunar lander. 20th of March 23, a lunar lander by Japanese company iSpace entered orbit round the moon. The Hakuto mission, one lander entered orbit around the moon after performing a burn. The company called the maneuver a success. So it's setting up the lander to actually land in late April next month. The spacecraft launched in December, is carrying a set of customer payloads, and it was launched by SpaceX. I think it was a rideshare mission. If it's successful and it touches down on the moon, it'll be the first private spacecraft to make a soft landing following the governments of Soviet Union, United States, and China. Of course, Israel has tried, failed. India tried and failed. So now Japan are up on the starting line. So we'll see what happens. Refer to a video. Here we go.
The commercially manufactured robotic moon lander, Hakuto-R, slipped into lunar orbit on March 21, more than 3 months after its launch. Developed by Tokyo-based iSpace, Hakuto-R Mission 1 was launched atop a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket on December 11 last year. After traveling into a long-duration fuel-efficient ballistic lunar transfer trajectory that took it 1.5 million kilometers from the Earth, the spacecraft swung back to rendezvous with the moon earlier this month. After a lengthy burn by its main engine, the spacecraft entered lunar orbit on March 21 at 1:24 a.m. UTC. Entering the lunar orbit is the 7th of 10 milestones iSpace set for the mission that started with launch preparations. If all goes well, the spacecraft will descend to the floor of Atlas crater in late April, making it the first fully commercial lander to do so. Once on the lunar surface, the lander will deploy the United Arab Emirates Rashid rover and an experimental robot known as the Japanese Lunar Excursion Vehicle. The 10 kg Rashid rover is designed to study the moon for 14 Earth days, using a set of scientific instruments. 2 high-resolution cameras, a microscopic imager, a thermal imager, a probe designed to examine electrical charges on the lunar surface, and other tools are all part of the rover's arsenal. The 80mm wide 250 grams Japanese transformable lunar robot will deploy tiny wheels to roll across the lunar surface and collect data and imagery. The data it collects will aid in designing a future pressurized rover to transport astronauts on the lunar surface. iSpace plans to launch 2 more robotic missions to the lunar surface in 2024 and 2025.
That was pretty cool. So something to look forward to next month.
The commercial
The end. That's it. Thank you.